Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my 2024 LCS Spring Split Primer video. Super excited to get into this. We're going to be getting into all 8 teams in the LCS here today, going over, all of their rosters. We're going to be power ranking them from number 8 to number 1 in the league. We'll be power ranking every single player in terms of their position as well. If you have not been following this series, this is the 3rd video that we've done in kind of the primer series. We did the LEC last week. We did the LCK just a couple of days ago. It's LCS time with the league kicking off this weekend. I'm incredibly excited. I know you guys are excited as well, and so I am going to pander a bit at the beginning of the video. Leave a like on this if you do find yourself enjoying it. I'm not going to ask you to like it before you see any of the content. That's a pretty crazy thing to say, but if you find yourself 5, 10, 15 minutes into this video and you're really enjoying the kind of analysis that I'm putting out, or maybe you like the way that I talk about things, I really would appreciate if you left a like on the video. But without further ado, let's jump into the housekeeping. I do have to do some housekeeping at the beginning of all of these primer videos because that is just how it goes. First of all, if you haven't watched my video on the offseason that I did for the LCS already, you can check that out up in the iCard right now. You can check out my thoughts and opinions on all of these teams and whether or not they're moving in the right or the wrong direction, in my opinion. We're going to be a little bit more focused on 2024 in terms of, what I'm talking about in today's video, but that video kind of goes over the process that I think these organizations have and whether or not I trust them as organizations. This is obviously going to be mostly about the teams, though, in today's video. And the aim, I guess the point of today's video is going to be a little bit for everybody. If you're new to the league, if maybe you haven't watched the LCS in a couple of years and you want to get back into it, you want to see, what some of these new teams are about, we're going to be going through every single team, talking about all the players, talking about what their expectations are, what the narratives are kind of surrounding this team, and I'll be throwing my opinion in there as well. So it's very, newbie friendly, but also if you're a veteran, if you're a fan of the LCS, this is a pretty big video as well because I will be power ranking every single team from 8 to 1. Now, I want to specify what these power rankings are. First off, it's just my opinion. Some people get very cross on the internet when your opinion does not match theirs. I can only give the, forewarning that my opinion isn't going to match yours. There is no opinion that I'm going to give that is going to be 100%, accurate with everybody else's opinions. I'm going to have my own little takes here and there that are a bit different than the consensus, and, that all comes from me watching these games over the course of the last few years, but, we're allowed to have different opinions, and I would love to talk about those different opinions down in the comment section below if you find yourself kind of thinking, oh, I wonder why he put this person here. Obviously, I'll explain everything in the video, but if you have any, gripes or concerns, just leave them down in the comment section below. But I will say, I have been very accurate when it comes to these videos the past 3 years that I've been posting them on the channel, and for the LCS, it's been longer than that. I think I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years in a row now, and they've aged incredibly well. This is one of the better regions in terms of my preseason predictions. I will say something new for this year that I have talked about in some of the other videos. I've kind of got this little algorithm that I'm testing out in terms of being able to evaluate players and teams. It's nothing extraordinary or extravagant or anything crazy. I put individual values in that I believe these players have that averages out across certain positions. It adds a weighted total, and it gives me an idea of where these teams might be able to land, maybe the clusters of teams. They are going to be, ranked in that order in this video, but if I find that I want to manually override and put a team in a certain spot that maybe they didn't, end up getting, I will do that myself, and I don't think I did that in today's video, but, I would if necessary. I basically completely reordered the LEC, but, there is some sort of process that goes into this, and also, for the rest of the housekeeping, this is kind of a floor ranking. I want to make that clear as well. I don't think that this is necessarily the order that these teams are guaranteed going to end up in at the end of the spring split, but this is basically a confidence list, a confidence ranking. The teams at the bottom are the teams that I think have the most to prove, the teams that I have the least confidence in, the teams that, while they still could do well, especially in an 8-team league, I'm just not sold are going to be world beaters in the same way that the teams at the top are going to be. They're teams that I would be more shocked would fail than the teams at the bottom. That's more so the ranking that I'm going for, a floor ranking rather than a ceiling ranking, if you will, but I will be talking about all of the team's ceilings when we talk about them individually. But that's the housekeeping out of the way, at least at the beginning here. I hope you guys are excited because I know I am, and it's time to jump right into it. If you are new here, we are going to go from number 8 to number 1 in my personal power rankings. So we're going to be going from the bottom to the top. We're going to be ranking all of the teams, all of the players. We're going to be talking about upside, theoretical downside of what these teams could offer, and that means we get to start it off in my D tier. And kicking off our D tier, I should explain, I am going to tier them a bit as well. These tiers are very flexible, as the rankings are as well. If you want to move a team up, 1 or 2 spots, or down 1 or 2 spots, I can probably get behind that, although I think it's a little bit less flexible than maybe it is for like the LEC or the LCK or the LPL, where, more teams does create inherently more flexibility. I think there are tiers of teams, which is why I want to tier them. We're going to be going from D to C to B to A to, surprise, S at the top of the standings here, and we'll kind of explain what those tiers are as we go throughout, and that means we get to kick it off with the D tier. The D tier for me, teams that have a lot of question marks, teams that don't really have a lot of top-end talent, have some major issues at key positions, but I don't think anybody in the LCS is a disaster. I think everybody has something interesting going for them, and even coming in at number 8 for me, I think is, a team that is pretty interesting in my eyes, as I talked about in my grades video. So, coming in at number 8, it is going to be Immortals, and I know that I've hyped up this team a bit in the offseason because I do think I like their offseason more than the average LCS fan. I like their 2 imports. I think they're very interesting young players that, are the right kind of players to be importing. We'll talk about a bad example of what importing looks like in a couple of, teams later on in this video, but I think this is the right kind of importing, and I think you're kind of subsidizing that with really good North American talent, really stable North American talent. Well, stable outside of the bot lane, which I will say. So what you're seeing on the screen here, we'll quickly go over it. Of course, the team at the top, you'll see all of their finishes from last year, the spring split and the summer split records, as well as where they finished in that particular split. The season finals, that's going to include the LCS championship kind of ranking or placing that they ended up having last year. Obviously, Immortals didn't make it. They did not qualify as one of the top 8 teams to make the LCS championship, so they finished in 10th place based off of, summer record. And then where they are trending, in my opinion, technically, I guess Immortals is going up 2 spots, but that's only because we're 2 less teams. We've gone from 10 teams to 8 teams. They've gone from the last place team last year to the last place team in my power rankings this year. It's not really a huge surprise. And then, obviously, all 5 members of the team are listed. Any asterisks next to a player's name will just denote that they are an import. That is relevant in the LCS, where I think a lot of teams would import more than 2 players if they had the opportunity to, but 2 is the limit, although it's not nearly as bad as it's been in years past. A lot of teams only have 1 import. Some even have 0 imports, so it's definitely a lot better than it has been. And then there is a number below every player. That number is going to represent where I rank them in terms of their position. Now, this is even more flexible than the team rankings are. The player rankings are, so context heavy that, I don't want you to just look at the number and take it entirely out of context. First of all, you can move up, a player probably 2 or 3 spots up or down, and I'll feel okay about that. If I have a player at 5 and you want them at 3, fine. If you want them at 7, fine. Like, I don't argue with that in the comment section below. That's basically the opinion I have anyways. These are very flexible rankings, and obviously not all positions are created equal. Being ranked, 5 or 4 in the top lane is a lot more valuable than being ranked 5 or 4 in the support position, or 5 or 4, hell, even in the mid lane in the LCS, because the depth of talent at those positions is just not nearly as strong as it is, in some others. And so just because 2 players may have the same number next to them doesn't mean that I think they're of the same skill level. That's going to be where a lot of the analysis ends up coming in. And that's the end of the housekeeping. I know it's a lot at the beginning of these videos, but I do have a lot to specify. It's a format that I really want to make sure everybody understands before we jump into the actual analysis. So let's kick it off with Immortals. Their lineup is looking like Castle in the top lane, Armeo in the jungle, Mask in the mid lane, Tactical at AD carry, and Ole at support. Like I said, this was the case of an organization that I think had a plan in the offseason. People lambasted them online, on social media, for importing in both of their solo lanes rather than promoting from the NACL or trying to find, a lot of these other players that had, suddenly lost their jobs on Golden Guardians or on Evil Geniuses that, didn't necessarily get a shot in a different organization. And while, obviously I think this team would love to have a player like Licorice, I think it was too late in the offseason for them to actually go and make that move. But I think if you are going to bring in, like, young imports, these are 2 good imports to bring in. in, which is why I want to start with them. We'll start with Mask, because he was the first signing of the offseason, period. He was the first player to be brought into an organization or to be announced to be brought in. I really like Mask. I think he's a really interesting player. He's not exactly the flashy import that I think a lot of people really want to see if you're going to bring in a young ERLs, like Korean mid laner into the league, but he is a very, very good player. He excels on these more like supportive team-oriented picks. His Galio is one of the best that I've seen. It's actually outstanding how good he was on that champion when I was watching tape for him. I was genuinely blown away, and he's going to come in already as the 6th best mid laner in the LCS, even though he's never played at a top level. That comes in above other players who have. He's the only mid laner who's not played at a top level, and he's going to come in, above a couple of other players. And so I do value him pretty highly as a player. I think he was a really interesting import. Now, is he a perfect player? No, he really hasn't been given the opportunity to be a major carry for any of the teams he was on. He was on UOL Sexy Edition last year, and, he was good on that team, but that team was very, very weird, and it was hard to kind of get a grasp of, how they wanted to play the game. I think Mask didn't necessarily fit super well into that roster, but I think he'll fit better here in the LCS, where games do go a bit longer, where it's a bit okay to be more passive in the early game. We've seen players like Rich come in and be really good in the LCS, maybe when they weren't as good in their own domestic region, because the game is a bit different here, and the way the teams play is a bit different. I think Mask actually fits the LCS style really well, and I would expect him to come in and be a solid mid laner. And then you've got Castle on the top side. He's coming in from the LCK Challengers League. This one I'm definitely a bit more hesitant on. He was the substitute top laner for KT Challengers, which is certainly not a great statement to make, but he's been in KT's system for a really long time. This is a player that we've actually seen play, a lot of different times over the past, 4 or 5 years. And, he's a really interesting, quote unquote prospect. He's never played at a top level. He's just been around in the scene for a long time. I'm less confident that he's going to be able to come in and immediately be an impact, but every time we've seen him, he's actually been a pretty solid player, and he was stuck behind what I consider to be the best top laner in the Challengers League in Korea last year in Perfect. And so, I'm not going to sit here and say that he's not talented at all, but he has got a lot to prove. He's going to come in as my number 7 top laner, only coming in above one other player, which we will get to, obviously, throughout the rest of these teams. I think he definitely is talented, but I don't think he's a superstar, and I don't think he has superstar upside in the same way that I think someone like Mask could potentially become a really, really good mid laner at the LCS level. I like Mask a lot more as an import than I like Castle, but Castle definitely still has upside in that same vein. Then you have 3 North American players, as is pretty traditional for a team like this. One of them is returning from this team last year, that being Tactical in the AD carry spot. He's going to be the highest ranked player on this team, coming in as the 5th ranked AD carry in the league, and he's probably going to be a massive part of whether or not this team is successful or not over the course of this year. He had kind of a career resurgence here last year on a bad Immortals team. He really was dragging them across the finish line in a lot of these games. They won 4 and 5 games respectively in spring and summer, and basically all of those were off the back of Tactical in the bot lane. And so it's really good for them to be able to retain him, for them to be able to bring him back. And he is a solid ADC, but it was a rebound year, and Tactical is certainly not known as the most consistent AD carry in the entire world. That time on TSM was incredibly destructive and really not good. And honestly, even in spring, there were moments where he didn't look all that perfect. His mechanics are really good, but his brain sometimes just shuts off. And you're really relying on him a lot in this team, because Mask is more of a supportive player. You don't really know what you're going to get out of Castle on the top side of the map. Tactical is probably going to be a primary carry for how this team wants to play for a lot of this year, and you're really going to need to rely on him being able to continue the form that he showed for most of the summer split. I do think it's possible, but I think it's a little more up in the air than maybe you would expect considering how he played. But you are pairing him with Ole. I feel really bad here. I'm going to give him the last ranked support spot, number 8. I like Ole as a player. I think he's really solid. I think he's the pinnacle of consistency, if you will, but support is like surprisingly good in the LCS. We talk about support being a very weak position in a lot of the other, regions, with the LEC and the LCK both not really having good support positions in their regions. I think the LCS, in comparison to the rest of the positions, is actually a bit better, and especially it's a lot more deep towards the bottom. Maybe the top end isn't quite, as strong, but the bottom definitely is, and Ole's, just a good player, because the only thing I have to go on is the last couple times that he's played in the LCS, the last couple times that he's played pro, and those weren't very good experiences. It didn't really matter which team he was on. He was a, bottom tier support the last couple of times he was in the LCS. Obviously, I know he's been rank 1 on the Korean ladder. I know his mechanics mechanics are apparently cracked. I know his mental is apparently a lot better after the last couple of years, but, you know, if we're getting that version of Immortals Ole from, you know, 2018 or 2017, I should say, again, then great. I think Tactical is actually a very similar player to who he played with last time he was on this Immortals team in Cody-san, and so, you know, perhaps there is upside there. Perhaps there is a way for these two to get the best out of each other, but it's just hard for me to predict that's absolutely going to happen when the last couple times Ole has been in the LCS, it's just not been very good. There is a chance that this is a, you know, middle tier bot lane, a top 4-ish bot lane in the LCS. I think that that is definitely realistic, especially if they play towards them a lot. But until I see them go out and do it, it's really hard for me to believe that that is just going to be the case. And then you're bringing Armeo into the jungle. I like Armeo. I think he's a solid player. I certainly did not think he deserved to get benched at the end of the year for Evil Geniuses. Clearly, they wanted to try to get Shaden some experience. You know, before Evil Geniuses pulled out of the LCS, it was reported that Shaden was still going to be their starting jungler. And so, you know, if you wanted to just give him that spot, you know, I like Shaden a lot, you know, as well. But, you know, Armeo deserves to be starting in the LCS. He was really solid for most of last year for Evil Geniuses. He just kind of collapsed a bit down the stretch. Again, known more of as a supporting, a facilitator in the jungle at this point in his career. He used to be a carry, you know, back on the Echo Fox days, back even on the TSM days, but I think as he went into the Team Liquid system, as he got, you know, a little bit more comfortable in the NACL and Academy, he became a lot better at these more engaged style, you know, tanky junglers, the Sejuanis, your Maokais, things of that sort, things of that nature, and I think that that is a role that he's kind of settled into in the LCS. I think there is a potential for him to carry a lot more on this team than perhaps he did in other, you know, situations, because you do have a very supportive mid laner or somebody who does like to play that style. Mask can carry as well. I don't want it to seem like he's not a player that has carry upside. This is just kind of what I saw from him on UOL. I think if you're going to play more of a supportive roaming mid style, then, you know, playing towards Armeo and potentially trying to get him on carries and, you know, get him a lot of resources, that could be another style for Immortals to potentially win some games. But for now, he's going to come in at number 7, you know, near the bottom of the rankings because, again, you know, the talent pool is just really, you know, pretty decent towards the middle of the pack, especially with two teams, you know, contracting. It's hard to be in that top 5 or 6 in basically any position. And Armeo comes in at number 7 because of that, but he is more than capable as a starting jungler. I like this team. I honestly think they'll probably finish better than 8th, but in terms of floor, I think they do have the lowest floor because I think there is a chance that they don't have a true carry, that Armeo is more of a facilitator and that Tactical doesn't repeat. And I think if Tactical isn't who we think he is in the bot lane, this team is probably going to struggle a lot and that they very well probably will get 8th. In that circumstance, you're relying a lot on two, you know, Korean import solo laners that have never played at a top level before, at least, you know, full-time as starters. And, you know, that's a lot of expectation. And outside of that, you don't really have any sort of consistency. And so when it comes to floor, because this is a floor ranking, they are going to come in at the bottom of the LCS, but I do think this team has, you know, genuine upside. I think I like them a bit more than maybe your average analyst, even if I'm putting them here at 8. And now moving on to our number 7 team in the power rankings. This is still going to be the middle of D tier for me, so teams that I still would expect to maybe not so much compete for the top of the standings, but, you know, have some pretty gaping flaws and, you know, maybe some good upside, but, you know, definitely some concern. And coming in for me at number 7, it is going to be Dignitas. I had this team at 7 for pretty much all of the offseason. I honestly kind of want to put them at 8 because, you know, we just talked about Immortals coming in at 8. I think Immortals has more upside than Dignitas does. This is the team that I am the least interested in the LCS, the least excited for in the LCS in 2024, but I do think their floor is significantly higher, if only because they have 1 star, right? You know, you're talking about a team in Immortals in 8th that you're very much concerned with where they're going to be able to play through, where they're going to be able to win from. I'm not concerned about that for Dignitas. You know where you can play through if you have to be able to go and do that. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Rich in the top lane, XU in the jungle, Dove in the mid lane, Tomo at AD carry, and Isles at support. You know, typically in this section, I would start off with what I like about the team, but honestly, there's a bit that I like. I mean, a couple of these players are interesting, but I'm really not sold on the dynamic that they ended up bringing in at the start of 2024 here. I think their one import this offseason that was new in the mid lane is probably the worst import of the offseason of any major region, and I really don't think that you did enough on the rest of this roster to end up making it worthwhile. So let's talk about the players that are staying first, because you have 2 players from the main roster last year, 1 player from the Challengers team last year. You've got Rich and Tomo coming back. for a full year this time for Tomo, and, I think that's going to be good. Rich was the best player on this team by a gigantic margin last year. He won so many games for Dignitas last year, even when this roster was really struggling at times, when you were looking at it and saying, I don't know where they're going to get these advantages. A lot of the players that we brought in to be stars for this team didn't end up working out. And so, it was really good to see Rich come in and basically play exactly how I thought he would play. He's somebody who, his career trajectory has basically always been the same. He's very weak in lane, but he's a very good team fighter. He was the greatest player in the history of Heroes of the Storm. That is kind of what you would expect from that player coming into pro play. That was his LCK career on Nongshim. That was his LPL career on Victory 5. And so, you weren't entirely surprised by the outcome and the output that you were getting from Rich in the LCS. But the thing about that is that style is significantly more valuable in the LCS than it is in those other two regions, because games are just longer. Teams are just slower in the LCS than they are. They're a lot more passive. The aggression isn't here in North America nearly as much. It's not as much of a lane-dominant region, and so you can have a player like Rich, who really isn't that great of a laner, and his lane stats were much better last year, but really isn't that great of a laner. You can have that guy, kind of be good enough for most of the game and then really start to dominate the back half and be one of the more valuable top laners in the entire league. And he was last year. He was an all-pro caliber guy last year. He's going to come in at number 3 for me, and that's high. There's going to be some players that people really like that are below him. Some very, very popular players that I'm definitely going to get some pushback on that are below him in the rankings. But I truly do believe that Rich is better than those players at the current moment. He does what those players are supposed to do, just at a very high level, and he did it last year, and that's the part that I really stick towards. And so I like Rich a lot. He is the reason this team is coming in 7th. I have to be entirely honest. If it was not Rich, if it was an average, 5th or 6th best top laner in the league on Dignitas, this is the 8th best team in the league, and it's not particularly close because I'm not high on the rest of this roster, but I am high on Rich. I also am relatively high on XU in the jungle. I know he comes in as my last ranked jungler in the LCS, but that's because jungle is a position where right now especially it's a lot of proven talent. Armeo is the player that we saw coming in just above him at number 7. I like Armeo. He has proven to be a solid LCS starting caliber jungler. That's what everybody else in the jungle role has proven, and XU just hasn't necessarily proved that at this level yet, but I love what I've seen from XU in the second tier of North America. When he was playing in the spring split, obviously in summer, the NACL ended up going through a lot of changes. A lot of players ended up losing teams and jobs. XU was one of them. Dignitas didn't have their Challengers team, but when he was playing for Dig Challengers in the spring split, he made finals. He was a finalist, and he was probably the best player on that team. We've already seen what his teammate Insanity could do on TSM last year. I'm really excited to see what XU can do with a full year starting in the LCS. Obviously, he's been given his cup of coffee before in 2022, but this is really going to be his opportunity, his chance to go out and show that he can be one of the best, junglers in North America for the next couple of years. And I certainly think that that's possible. By the end of the spring split, if he's top, 3 or 4 in the jungle position, I'm really not going to be all that shocked. He has been really good in tier 2. I just need to see it. It's hard for me to project and predict that he's instantly going to be better and more equipped to win on a bad team like this than any of the other junglers that we're going to talk about in the rest of this video. And so I'm erring on the side of caution. His floor, in my opinion, is the lowest of any jungler in the LCS, but I think his ceiling is actually really high as well. I think the top side of the map is where I'm excited, and honestly, I don't hate the bot lane either. You're returning Tomo onto this team. He's getting a full year. Obviously, he started with Spawn last year. I still really like Spawn, but he was not a good fit for a Dignitas team that was running Santorin and Jensen as a mid-jungle duo. Probably the most passive mid-jungle duo in the entire league in terms of actually trying to generate advantages in the early game. Both of them, wanted to scale towards late game. For those of you who have been watching the LEC, think very similar to Rogue. That was what Dignitas kind of was last year, this year's version of Rogue. And so when Tomo came in and was this aggressive ADC that they could play around and, could really, try to get advantages from in the early game, that was something that helped out this team a lot. Now, is Tomo a great player individually? I don't think he's great. I think he's good. That's why he comes in at number 7. He's not my number 8 ranked ADC, but I think it's very possible that he ends the year as the number 8 ranked ADC. I just think that, he's a player that I expect to not really have nearly as much upside as maybe some of the other, AD carry prospects that are in the league at the current moment. While his aggressive style does help him, it also does limit just how consistent he's going to be if you play him game to game to game. And, I certainly don't think that's going to be helped by the fact that mid lane's going to be very inconsistent throughout the year. But I think adding Isles to this team actually does help them quite a bit, in my opinion. I really like Isles. He's been good basically at every stop. Hasn't played in the last year or so, at least in North America, competitively. But every other time that he has played, not only at this level, but at the lower level, at even in Oceania, he's been really good. He's been a player that is absolutely worth watching, and I think bringing him in here is a great idea. He's probably an LCS caliber support, or at least what he has shown to be is an LCS caliber support. I still can't rank him higher than any of the other proven guys at this position, or players that, really dominated Tier 2. Those are the ones that are going to rank slightly above him, just because it has been a little while since we've seen Isles play. But, I feel pretty confident that Isles is a good support. It's all going to be up to whether or not Tomo can turn into like an above average or, even a league average AD carry. Because, he was fine last year, but he wasn't a game breaker. He wasn't a game changer. And they really do rely on him quite a bit on this Dignitas team to generate in the early game, because he really is the only one that has been able to do that. I think XU coming in will help that, because XU is a very good early game jungler. But mid lane, to me, this is the worst import of the offseason. This is the worst signing of the offseason. I lambasted this. I criticized it a lot in my offseason grades video. I'm just not a fan of Dove. I really don't understand what Dignitas is seeing here. Dove was a player who played for, an Invictus Gaming team that started off really hot, really started to fall apart as the year went on, and he eventually got benched on that team for Cryan, and that was absolutely the right choice. He was the weak link of an Invictus Gaming team that really wanted to make playoffs really badly. He was the reason they ended up not making playoffs. Not the only reason. I don't think Gideon played particularly well either, but, he was really bad last year, so much so that he was getting benched on a non-playoff team in the LPL, and you go back to the year before that, he was playing top lane in the LCK for Sandbox, and that team was basically jungle and bot lane and just hoping and praying that they could win without a good top laner. Like, Dove has just never been anything other than a super below average player at a top level anywhere that he has played. He has been replaceable everywhere that he has played, and so to spend a major import slot on him if you're Dignitas here, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I saw people criticizing the imports of players like Mask and Castle, but I see a lot of upside in them. I see the potential for them to be able to come in and, be some of the best players in their roles in the region if everything clicks. I just don't see that in Dove. This feels like such a low upside mid lane bring. And what does he offer to the team? Well, he offers, I guess, consistency. He likes to play more mages in the mid lane, but he can be a bit more aggressive. He is relatively flexible. I think, going to top lane really helped out his playstyle a bit. He was very aggressive early on in his career. I think he's settled down and become a lot more passive for this team, for the teams that he has played for, which I would expect to carry over here, but perhaps maybe I'm just underrating his laning phases. Perhaps going from the LPL to the LCS, it's just going to increase his mechanical capacity, but, we've seen better players come over from the LPL and struggle immensely. I don't think Dove is one of the players that I'm expecting to really break out here. Dove is, in my opinion, somebody that is not going to be a super advantageous player towards this team. I hope him and XU can develop some chemistry together. Mid-jungle is very important. It's been important for the last couple of years, but, even if there are a couple of players on this team that I like XU, I like Isles, Tomo's fine, and Rich is obviously a star, and he's the reason they're coming in at 7. You just can't justify them coming in anywhere above 7th. I think this is the absolute highest that you can put them in a power rankings. I really would not expect them to even be, a top 5 or 6 team in the league. I don't think this team is going to be very good this year. Maybe I'll eat my words. This team did do a lot better than I expected them to in the season finals last year, getting 6th place, but I think this is going to be a bottom tier team in North America, and I would really be surprised, more even so than Immortals, if they were able to break out of that mold. And now moving on to number 6 in the power rankings. Top 6 is pretty important here in the spring split in the LCS because that is playoffs. And so you don't want to be one of the bottom 2 teams. Every team from here on out is technically a projected playoff team from me. And so obviously we'll continue talking about tiers and overall year expectations, but these all are teams, and every team in the league kind of expects to make playoffs, but especially I think these 6 are expecting to make playoffs. Coming in at the top of D tier still, I know, a playoff team in D tier, that's pretty crazy, but coming in at the top of D tier and at number 6 in my power rankings, it's going to be 100 Thieves. I know that a lot of people are really excited about this roster, and I am as well. I think there's a lot to like about what they've been able to put together here. It reminds me a lot of another org that I'll talk about in just a second, but there's also reason to believe that it might be a bit of a slow start. A couple of these guys are, you know, prospects more than they are like guaranteed star players up until this point in their career. They brought in a couple of, you know, well, one real veteran and another player who's played in the LCS before to kind of guide them through, but this is still a very, you know, unproven roster, which is why I just don't think I could comfortably put them any higher than 6th, even if I do like the direction they are heading. Their lineup is looking like Sniper in the top lane, River in the jungle, Quid in the mid lane, Meech at AD carry, and Ayla at support. Again, 2 pseudo-veterans here in River and Ayla, 2 people who have played, you know, a decent amount in the LCS. Ayla maybe not as much as River, obviously. He's only really had half a split for Evil Geniuses, but, you know, that half a split was really good, and it was like a playoff caliber half a split, and so, you know, we'll take that into account. River, obviously, very experienced at this level, but you've got a rookie in the top lane, you've got a rookie in the bot lane, and you've got a, you know, pseudo-rookie in the mid lane, right? Somebody who's finally getting a full split to practice and train and get ready with the team that he was signed towards in the LCS, you know, for an entire year. So, you know, there's a lot that I think can go right for this team. I really like the direction they're heading. Like I said, I think ideology-wise, I'm very much behind this. The team that they remind me the most of, and I said this a lot in my off-season grades video, is CLG, 2022 Spring CLG. That's what this reminds me of when they went, okay, we're under new management. We want to invest in North American talent. We want to invest in the talent that's coming up through our ecosystem. Let's go. Jenkins, you're in. Contracts, you're back in. You know, we eventually got Palafox in the mid lane, you know, Luger and Poom at the time, but eventually investing into players like FBI who have been in the system for a while. Like, they wanted to build a North American roster through players that had come up through Academy. And obviously 100 Thieves is going for something similar here, and honestly, I think they have the right people. I just don't know if it's going to be a year one kind of effect. You do have veterans here. You have a player in River in the jungle that I think is going to be a centralizing piece for how this team wants to play early on in this season. He was obviously fantastic last year on Golden Guardians. That team really fumbled it down the stretch. They really kind of lost their edge, their ability to play at a super high level down the stretch. You know, getting that 4th seed, getting destroyed in the World's Qualifying Series by BDS. It wasn't exactly a great end of the season for Golden Guardians, but remember, in the summer regular season and even in the end of spring, you know, we were talking about them as one of the more dangerous, if not the most dangerous team in North America if everything was clicking for them. A lot of that was River and River's early game control, which he just was really, really good at. If he can continue to get his laners ahead in the same way that he was able to do on Golden Guardians last year, that's going to accelerate this process immensely. Bringing in a veteran like him that can run the game early, that you can play around, that is a bit of a carry player, I actually think this is a really good idea for 100 Thieves. I think this is basically the perfect signing if you wanted a full rookie team around him, but you're also bringing in Ayla, and Ayla is definitely still a young player, but Ayla was really good last summer, and I know you're not going to hear that opinion all that much. In fact, I've seen a lot of negative takes regarding Ayla online. I just don't think I agree. I actually was really impressed by the tape that I saw from him on Evil Geniuses. Is he the most mechanically talented support in the world? No, I don't think he's the most mechanically talented support, but I actually think he has a really good idea of where he should be and what he should be doing at a lot of times, and that is more than enough to carry you at an LCS level to being one of the better players in North America. I don't know if he's going to become that game breaker like I thought he was going to when he started coming up through the Academy system, you know, with Team Liquid. When he came up with Busio, those 2 big supports that will always be linked, especially now that Ayla's replacing Busio on this team. I thought Ayla was the better player. I thought Ayla was the better prospect, and honestly, spoiler alert, I still have Ayla ranked higher. I think he is the better player right now. I think he's the more versatile player right now because of the playstyle that he does offer, and that is certainly not a popular opinion. I don't know if he will be by the end of the year because of the 2 different teams that they are on, but Ayla's a really solid support and somebody that I think is a really good signing for 100 Thieves. I also think top and bot, the promotions are really good signings here. Sniper, I guess, isn't a signing. It's more of a promotion than it is a signing because he was in this 100 Thieves system. We've basically been waiting for this guy to get old enough to play in the LCS. He's been anointed as the next great top laner in North America since he was 13 years old. And, you know, obviously it's really cool to see, you know, a brother of somebody who was formerly Rookie of the Year in Viper join the league and play top lane. That's, you know, definitely one of the coolest stories, I would say, of the offseason. But with all of that hype does come a lot of responsibility. And honestly, I don't know if it's going to be there for Sniper in year one. I would pump the brakes a bit on what you're expecting out of him in 2024. Obviously, the upside and the growth has absolutely been there. He's been very good from a young age, and he has gotten better, but I think a lot of people would assume the trajectory has been a lot quicker than it has been. He was good in the NACL, but he wasn't like one of the 3 best top laners in the NACL. He was just a good top laner in the NACL, surrounded by a really good team. There were games that he would be able to win on his own because his laning is so strong and he is able to translate those leads, but if he's not able to get that lead, he's kind of just a guy. And so as much as I really like Sniper, and I really do think this is the right idea to just put him in the lineup and really start to build around him, get him some LCS experience, so that when the rest of the team does become a little bit more established around him, whether that's, the rest of the team growing with him or, moving in different directions, whatever you end up wanting to do, the Sniper is ready by that point. I think this is the right idea, but I don't think it's going to be, especially a split one thing for Sniper. I think there will be some growing pains, there will be some learning curves for him in year number 1, and that's why he's going to rank as number 8 for me. He's just the least established of the top laners that are in the LCS at the current moment, but I would expect him to eventually be a star. The potential is absolutely there. I just need to see a bit more immediate growth, current ability growth, if you will, before I truly anoint him as one of the best top laners in the region. And then obviously you're bringing Meech in as well. Played for CLG in the spring, and then when the NACL went through all its changes, got signed to DSG, got signed to Disguised in the mid-season, ended up winning the NACL title in the summer split with that really strong Disguise team. Meech is a really fun player. It's a very similar story, though, to what I said about Sniper. As much as I love Meech, and I even think more, obviously, Meech's upside is there than Sniper's. Sniper's upside has been there since he was 13, 14 years old, and he's kind of grown with that reputation, and while he has lived up to it to an extent, he's never really dominated at, the lower levels in the same way that you would want from his pedigree. Meech, at times, is dominant, and very much will dominate, especially Tier 2, and he has been more than ready for a call-up to Tier 1 over the past year or so. But the problem with Meech is that he is a very aggressive and, by extension, rather inconsistent AD carry. The player that I compared him to when I really started watching him, full-time in 2021, 2022, around that time, was Tactical. I think it was a pretty apt comparison at the time. Tactical, obviously, has not had the best of years since then, but like the good version of Tactical, if you will, where he can be this big game-changing presence, but he does need a bit of help surrounding him in order to get there, and that's why, for me, until he proves he can dominate in the same way at Tier 1, he is going to come in at number 8. I think he has the lowest floor of any AD carry at the LCS level. That includes a lot of the other ADCs that I don't think have nearly the upside that he does, but again, until he comes in and proves it, I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach on a player that, I have been more critical on, I think, in the NACL than other analysts have been. I think a lot of people are very excited about Meech. A lot of people have a lot of expectation and hype around him. Same thing with Sniper. Again, I like these players as prospects. Don't take these rankings as, I hate these guys and I don't think they will ever be good. That is certainly not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I just don't know if it's going to be year 1 for these guys in particular. There were a couple of prospects that I thought were very LCS ready. These guys are definitely deserving of an LCS call-up. I just don't know if they're going to dominate. The comparison I made was 2022 CLG in spring. That team went 6-12, and so I think it could be a similar start for 100 Thieves, but if they continue to build, I think it'll be fun. But then you've got Quid. I forgot to talk about Quid. I probably should talk about him, huh? He is the one returning member from 100 Thieves last year, and he did not have the start to his LCS career that a lot of people wanted. I was very low on Quid when they signed him. I'm somebody who does watch the LCK Challengers League rather regularly, and, Quid, the scouting report I can give you on Quid is that he is the carriest of carry players. He is the resource-heavy, please feed me, let's play through mid lane kind of mid lane, or at least that's what he was in the Challengers League. He was able to do that on Gen G Challengers because that team was really bad. They just were not very good at the game, and everybody else was losing, and so Quid being able to win and then being able to play through him was, really, really big for them, and, he got a lot of resources on that team. It just didn't work last year when you had players like Doublelift and Closer, who are also very resource-heavy players on that team. My concern with Quid is that he is going to take resources away from Meech and from Sniper. Meech in particular, I think, really thrives when he gets to play strong side, when he gets to play with resources, and Quid is a player that, did grow a bit playing weak side last year, but it's just not, it's not his repertoire. It's not the thing that he has been practicing over the last few years. I think it will maybe take some adjusting, and honestly, I don't know if Quid is the guy. This is the split, in my opinion, to find out whether or not Quid is the guy, because there are a ton of really good NACL mid lane options that potentially you could give a call midway through the year and, give them that call up. Players like Young, players like Shochi, that I think would be more than deserving of a spot like this. But, I do understand you brought Quid in for the long term, not for the short term last year. And so you want to give him another chance potentially to grow with the rest of this team. I could see it working out. But again, all of this just leads into my thoughts of, I don't know if they're going to be all that good in year number one. I think top lane will struggle against the best in the league. I think bot lane will struggle against the best in the league. River might be able to stabilize, and maybe these players are a lot, better right now. They have better current ability than I'm projecting them. But for now, I think they're going to be a really fun, interesting team that, constantly makes things close and shows flashes over the course of this split. But in the end is probably just a couple months or a year or so away from being a team that legitimately competes for a top of the table standing post. And now moving on to number 5 in my power rankings. We're hitting the midpoint of this video, kind of the first half, I guess, concludes here, and this is going to kick off our C tier. We talked about D tier being teams that, while interesting, have some pretty major flaws, and I don't expect them to really compete at the top in year one. I think starting in C tier, I could see these teams being more relevant. I mean, these are teams that, at their peak, I think could be top 2, top 3. I'm not going to project them as such. I think they definitely have, maybe a lower ceiling than what I would expect out of the top 3 teams in the league, but I think C tier is still good and certainly good enough to do something really fun if you progress. And so kicking off our C tier and coming in at number 5 for me, it is going to be Shopify Rebellion. This is their first year, obviously, in LCS. They are the team that bought out the slot from TSM last year, although this really is more of an extension of TSM than it is, a brand new organization. It still is brand new ownership, but a lot of the staff, a lot of the players have been brought over from that TSM team last year that really did, overperform. I know they ended up finishing in 7th place in the season finals, and, it's not exactly where they wanted to be, but I do think this team did better than I think they expected to for most of that year. Especially finding some diamonds in the rough, some players that maybe they didn't even anticipate having on their roster all year long that ended up being key contributors for them. But let's talk about how, they've changed things up here in 2024, how you can expect to, kind of see them be a little bit different from that version of TSM last year. Their lineup is looking like Fake God in the top lane, Boogie in the jungle, Insanity in the mid lane, B-Boy, I believe, at AD carry, and Zazel at support. This is looking like the starting 5. I want to make a note. I'm not going to bring this up when we talk about B-Boy again, but Wild Turtle is on this roster. He's officially listed as a content creator, as a streamer for this team, and so I imagine that's the role that he's going to fill, but he's also in a lot of the promotional material for the LCS in 2024, so I'm not going to sit here and say that it would be impossible for Wild Turtle to not come in and play and be there for this team, but I think him and B-Boy are probably of relatively similar skill levels, or at least that's what I would anticipate going into the year, and so it wouldn't really change my analysis of this team all that much, rather just a little bit, I guess. But, if Wild Turtle plays, consider this ranking the exact same. It really wouldn't change a lot for me, but I think this is basically just an upgraded version of what TSM was last year, which is a pretty good thing to say for me in particular, who was a bit more of a fan of that TSM team from last year, who believed a bit more in that TSM team from last year. 3 new members of this team heading into 2024. 2 of them coming from Disguised, 1 of them coming from the CB LOL, he's bounced around in a lot of different areas, and then obviously 2 returning from TSM last year onto the Shopify team. But we'll talk about those 2 first, starting with Insanity in the mid lane, because I do think he is the core of this team. He comes in as my number 4 mid laner in the LCS, and honestly, he was better than that last year. He actively won so many games for this team. He was an MVP, candidate for me. I don't think he was a final 3 guy, but he was a top 5 guy for me in the league in terms of MVP voting, and that's pretty darn good for somebody who wasn't even supposed to be the starter for this team heading into the year. He got benched midway through the year because they wanted to play the person that actually was supposed to start in Ruby, but they realized that Insanity was going to win them so many more games, and it's good to see them, retain him going into 2024. He is a really solid player. He was somebody who I think got a little bit, tired of playing in the NACL, got tired of playing in Tier 2. He wasn't, performing up to his standards. I think in his final split on Dignitas Challengers, gets that spot in the LCS as essentially a stopgap until Ruby's able to get his visa and get in. And he's so good that he just has to play the rest of the year. if he can continue on that growth, he's a guy who dominated the NACL. Like, at his absolute best, he was top 1 mid laner, and it wasn't particularly close. That's the kind of guy that you want for the future of your organization. I think he's a really nice piece to be able to build around for the Shopify team, and obviously, it's a really big deal that they were able to bring him back. And then you've got Boogie returning in the jungle as well. He's not the only jungler on this roster. Worth noting that there are 2 starters from DSG, but the jungler Tomio from DSG last year is the substitute for this Shopify Rebellion team. Very much does feel like a 6th man situation. If Boogie struggles at any point early on in the season, I would not be surprised if that I guess trigger is very, very hair thin, if they're willing to pull that very early on. But Boogie's a solid player. He's not a superstar. He's not going to come out and dominate games, but him and Insanity have very good chemistry in the mid jungle duo. And I think that Boogie in the jungle will be a winnable game kind of thing. Like, you can win games because of Boogie in the jungle, and I think that that's a pretty realistic way of looking at it. I like him as a player, and I think that him and Insanity, obviously work together well. If he just continues to grow, I'm not expecting him to turn into, a top 4 or 3 jungler in the league, but if he can perform like the top, 5 or 6 jungler in the league, that's good enough for this team, because I do think you have upside and talent elsewhere. But again, I think Tomio could be even better if Tomio ends up coming in and starting for this team. I do think the ceiling of what they can accomplish ends up going up, even if the floor does go down just a tiny bit. And then you've got 2 members of DSG coming in. You've got Fake God in the top lane. You've got Zazel in the support position. Both of these guys more than deserving of their call-ups. Some would consider them a bit, veteran-y to be call-ups, if you will. But coming back up from tier 2 into tier 1, both of them have had, stints in the LCS. Zazel significantly more noticeable because he was on a Worlds semifinals team. He is a Worlds semifinalist, so to see him back in the LCS this time for Shopify, I think is really good. He has been the best support in tier 2 for a little while now. DSG dominated in a lot of different areas, and Zazel's just incredibly solid. He can do whatever you ask him to do. He's a little bit better on engagers than he is on enchanters, but still generally as a player, very versatile, a big shot caller, a big in-game leader, which I think will help basically any team that he ends up playing for. But, he is just that veteran, really stable presence that I think is actually going to work really well with a team full of, I don't want to say, wild players, but, B-Boy is a pretty wild AD carry, a pretty mechanic, heavy, pretty ego check kind of AD carry. Boogie can get like that at times. It's good to have that stability, I think, of Zazel coming in. And, his ranking of number 6, I think, is probably disrespectful. He will probably outperform that, but support, like I said, is sneakily pretty good and pretty deep in the LCS at the moment. So coming in at 6, just below players like Busio and Ayla, I think is not a bad ranking at all, in my opinion. But then you've also got Fake God in the top lane, also coming in as the number 6 top laner. Number 6 is a pretty common number here for Shopify, it would seem. He's a really solid top laner. Fake God is a channel darling. He's somebody who I've talked about for a long time. Loved him when he was in 100 Thieves system back in the day, even when he was filling in for Someday. He was playing way above his weight. He really had no business being that good so early on into his tenure as a pro, but was sent back down to the academy scene to kind of develop. Finally got another LCS shot on Dignitas a couple of years ago, but that team in general was just such a disaster. That organization has always been such a disaster that, things went really wrong, but they weren't exactly his fault. And yes, he did look really bad during that stint, but he goes right back down to tier 2, gets on Cloud9 Academy, dominates in spring, wins the championship, then moves over to DSG, similar with Zazel, ends up winning the championship in summer as well, was very clearly the number 1 top laner in tier 2, and has, again, more than earned his spot. And honestly, this is the best LCS team he has probably ever played with. And that includes that small LCS stint that he played with 100 Thieves, where they just were a disaster in a lot of different ways. The Bang experiment did not work out for them, but Fake God is a really solid player, somebody you can play through on the top side, and honestly, again, if he ends up outperforming this number 6 ranking, I wouldn't be surprised. He also comes in right below a really strong cluster of players. The top 5 top laners all feel really locked in, and so, for him to be the best of the rest, I think is a pretty, easy thing to say. And then, finally, you're bringing in B-Boy to start in the AD carry position. He has been a journeyman his entire career, started his career, obviously, in China, kind of bouncing around the scene there as a Korean, ended up going to Europe and playing for Misfits for one split, wasn't very good, ended up getting replaced on that team, and, he had to go back down and really take the tour of South America. He played in Latin America for a while, played in Brazil last year in the CBLOL, where he was actually very good, and now is getting a shot in North America. He's basically played in every single region with the exception of his actual nationality, Korea, which is very, very funny, but I think I like B-Boy a bit more than maybe other analysts would. I know he kind of gets a rap as being another one of those bad imports on the same level as a player like Dove, and, another player that we'll talk about a bit later that I'm not as high on, but I think B-Boy has upside that isn't necessarily all that bad to try to invest in. If your other option here was somebody like Wild Turtle, I don't really hate this idea. Now, if Stixay was available, I would certainly be saying bring Stixay in. I think that is a complete game changer for this Shopify team. It completely changes the outlook of them for me. They become a team that, really realistically could make like top 2 if everything ends up going right. But with B-Boy here, very aggressive ADC, somebody who's not going to be afraid to try and check you 2v2. Zeyzal's mechanically proficient enough to be able to keep up with that. I think this could be a very dominant early game duo, especially if Boogie wants to put a lot of attention there. But like I said earlier, Boogie likes to put attention mid lane to play with Insanity. He's done that in a lot of his other spots as well. And so I don't really know if bot lane's going to get the same kind of resources that maybe B-Boy was getting in the CBLOL. Also, Fake God's a really good player. You want to invest into him on the top side of the map, at least sometimes. I think the problem is, I'm a bit concerned about whether or not the lack of resources going to a lot of these strong side players is going to matter for this team, or whether or not it's just going to be fine. Like, Fake God's really good on weak side, so I'm not super concerned about him, but, Insanity, is he going to be the primary carry for this team, or is he going to settle back into that Immortals role that he had of more so being a secondary guy, a team fighter? Is B-Boy going to be super resource heavy, or is he going to be able to adapt and, grow into a role that's a little bit more focused around the isolated 2v2 rather than 3v3s in the mid game? It's going to be an interesting thing to check out. I like the talent of this roster. I do think it's a tier jump up from the 3 teams that I would consider to be at the bottom of the standings, but I'm still not sold on this team being, a world beater. I still think that there are a lot of questions, and even considering the top 5, they're going to be in the same tier as number 4. I'll spoil that. But even the number 4 team, I think, is, decidedly better than them, or more, established than them. They have a higher, floor than them, and that's why Shopify for me comes in at number 5, kind of isolated in their own little bracket here, is because, well, I do like the upside of this team. I could definitely see a world in which it goes wrong, but generally, I still really like the direction they went in the offseason, and I think this team could do a lot of really interesting things. And now moving on to number 4 in these power rankings, it's going to be the top of the C tier for me. This is really, it's kind of a half tier up. I've kind of talked about that in some videos. Sometimes these tiers are kind of split in half. I think this is a bit of a half tier up, but I wanted to give some respect to Shopify because I do think they deserved to be, considered better than the bottom, 3 teams in the league. But coming in at number 4 for me is going to be Team Liquid. This was a pretty easy choice. Top of C tier. This is a team that I think really could compete at their best if everything works out. I could theoretically see them somewhere around top 2, top 3. I'm just not going to predict that. I think the top 3 teams are the top 3 teams very clearly, and I think Team Liquid is a little bit lower than that in my rankings, but they still deserve to be top 4, in my opinion, even if I don't necessarily love the direction that this team was going in the offseason. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Impact in the top lane, T in the jungle, APA in the mid lane, Yawn at AD carry, and Core JJ at support. It's 3 returning members from last year, APA, Yawn, and Core, all returning from Team Liquid, and, that team really surprised towards the end of the year, but a lot of the big-name star power has left this team. Summit in the top lane is gone. He's gone over to the LLA. Pioshik in the jungle is gone. He's gone back to the LCK. And so you've brought in another LCK jungler in T, who, spoiler alert, I'm not nearly as high on. And you've brought Impact back in the top lane, which is a good thing. But let's start talking about the remaining members first. Let's start with Yawn and Core, because I think they're the part of the team that is considered, pun intended, kind of the core of this team at this point. Yawn is definitely the player Liquid seems to want to build around. Yawn certainly has his shortcomings. He's not a perfect player by any means. He definitely has some flaws, but he absolutely has his advantages as well. I think people really underestimate just how good he was in lane last year. You could argue that outside of Berserker and maybe Prince at times, he was the best laning AD carry in the LCS in 2023. He struggled a bit to be able to carry games on his own in the teamfight stage, but that's fine. I mean, you can live with that so long as you do have other carries on the team. Maybe he can continue to grow. He can continue to get better, but his ability to play 2v2s, like isolated without pressure, it's honestly very impressive. It's something he's been very good at going back to the academy days, and it continues to look like a strength for him moving into the LCS in 2024. He's going to come in as my number 4 ADC. That's probably about fair. AD carry, unlike some of the other positions that we've talked about top lane and support in particular being pretty deep. AD carry is probably the most top-heavy position in the entire league. I think it falls off very quickly after the top couple guys, and Yon coming in at number 4 does represent that a bit because he certainly is a bit of a flawed player, but in comparison to a lot of the other AD carries in the LCS, I think Yon is actually pretty darn good and somebody who's going to be able to compete at a relatively high level. And then you've got Core obviously supporting him. I think Core has been a lot better than people have been saying that he has been. He's not been Core JJ. He's not been the guy who came into North America and was instantly the best player when he came back in 2018, but he's been pretty darn good, or 2018, one of those 2 years, 2019, it's definitely 2019. When he came back in 2019, he was the best player in the league. He's not guaranteed the best player in the league anymore. I have him as the number 3 support, but I think he's kind of locked himself in to that number 3 spot in the support rankings. I think he is a very, very good player. Maybe not the elite top of the rankings player that he was, but him and Yon are very good as a duo. He's still very good in the isolated laning phases. That was something that was always a bit of a problem for him, actually, especially going back to the Gen G days. It really didn't feel like the isolated lane was really what they wanted to play for. He was always the roamer. He was somebody who wanted to be proactive. He was the playmaker for the team. And so to see him kind of adapt and really grow his game into being more of a balanced player overall, even if that means he's not quite as dominant in the area that he dominated before, it matches the meta a bit better now, and I think it does show just how good Core still is. I still think he is a major impact towards this team, pun not intended. And I think he will continue to be. I think this will be one of the more consistent bot lanes in the league, even if they're not exceptional. That's kind of just how LCS bot lanes are. Outside of Berserker, you're really not seeing a lot of these bot lanes that dominate every single game and that are constant win conditions. A lot of the other best bot lanes in the region are just very consistent, good bot lanes. Look at FBI and Ignar from last year. I think Yon and Core could fill a similar role if they continue to grow together in 2024. And then APA is returning here. It didn't look like he was, but he is going to be returning as the mid laner. I think this is absolutely the right call. People really, shit on APA for this small champion pool, and I get it. Like, the champion pool is not the biggest in the world. He certainly has a play style that he prefers to play, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he can be banned out every single game. If you ban 3 non-meta mid laners, that opens up the rest of this team to be in a really good spot, and honestly, if he's better at his champions than he is at the meta champions, let him play it anyways. Like, again, I understand that there is a problem with not being super flexible in terms of champion pools. But first of all, I think he's a little bit more flexible than people give him credit for. I know LS kind of got shit on when he said that, but he is definitely more flexible than 2 or 3 champions, like, Twitter and Reddit would like you to believe. But I get it. It's definitely a play style thing. He definitely has a style that he likes, but there are a lot of mid laners that people love, that people really hype up really heavily, that are kind of one style types of players. And even in like the LCK and LPL, especially in the LCK and in the LPL. And so I'm not going to sit here and say that what APA is a disaster for his team. He's not a perfect player. He's going to come in at number 5 for me. I don't think he's a major game changer, but this team got better for a reason when he entered the league last year, when he got promoted and called up midway through the year. I think he is a solid player and one that is more than good enough for you to be able to win with at the LCS level. And then 2 new changes. You're bringing Impact over from FlyQuest. People are going to be pretty upset about this ranking. I think he's only coming in at the number 4 spot in my top lane rankings. I think you're going to see a lot of other people put him at number 1, but as somebody who watches every single game of the LCS, every single week, and has basically since, for a decade now, Impact is not the player that you guys think he is. And I don't mean that in like a negative way. I mean that in that he is very different than I think the public perception ends up leading on. Public perception talks about Impact as this super stable rock on the top side that loves playing tanks, that can play weak side but still can carry and is always going to be an asset to the team. That just has not necessarily been the case for him over the course of the last few years. He is pretty volatile as a top laner, and I just don't think that that's the reputation that he has garnered. There are going to be games where he does really well. If he can scale into the late game, he's going to be really strong. But honestly, a big reason why I said Rich was going to do well in the LCS is because Rich is just kind of a better version of what Impact is, because man, his laning phases are just not good anymore. Like, they are really bad. He consistently loses early on. He gets absolutely dominated in bad matchups. It's very important for him to get good matchups in draft, or at least it has been on both FlyQuest and Evil Geniuses in the last few years. That's just kind of the version of Impact that we have. It's still very valuable because he's going to be a great team fighter. You could argue he's even a better team teamfighter than someone like Rich. And I'm not going to make that argument, but, I think they're very similar players. But the thing about it is just that I don't trust Impact to be able to survive game over game over game. I think he is a very good player, which is why he comes in at number 4. And I don't want this ranking to be representative of any sort of negative thoughts towards Impact. He still is in this cluster of players that I consider to be upper tier. He was a B+ player. Or a B player, I think, in my grading scale, somewhere around there. But, there are just a couple of players that I think are a little bit above him in terms of, what he offers at that level, and that's why he comes in at number 4. And then in the jungle. Umti's fine. He's okay as a player. The way I always described in the LCK is that he would have 4, 5, 6 games every single split when they're playing 25, 30 games over there. You'd have 4 or 5 games every split that are like, oh my god, this guy is hard stuck on Bro. He is way too good. He carried this game. He made Bro look awesome. Typically, they're at the beginning of every split, specifically Spring Split, where he does a lot better. But then he'd also have like 15 games where it's like, oh, this guy's not good. So it ends up being a net negative. At least it was in the LCK. I think it will balance out a lot more here in the LCS. I think the risks that he takes won't be punished nearly as heavily in the LCS as they are in the LCK, but I still think to me that averages out as about a league average jungler. He's going to come in at number 5 for me because, again, I think the top tier of junglers in the LCS are all incredibly good, and, I think you have to be... Is he better than a player like River, who comes in just above him? I don't know. I can't tell you that guaranteed. I think River was more aggro, and I would trust him a bit more individually after what we saw last year, but, maybe I'm low on Reddit loves this guy. They talk him up all the time, and I've just never really, bought the hype. I've talked about it a lot in my weekly LCK reviews. I've just never really bought in. Perhaps he can be a bit different here in the LCS where, again, the situation is a bit more forgiving, but I'm not going to predict that to happen. I think that, honestly, this team feels fine. They feel good, which is why they're not in my upper tiers. They're not in my B tier. They are separated from the top 3 because, while I do think this team is definitely better than, the bottom 3 teams and probably on par or maybe a little bit better than a team like Shopify in terms of tiering, I think that there is a gap here, and I think for me, they're the definitive number 4 team. They are separating the best teams in the league from the teams that can't compete with them, and I would be surprised if they ended up crossing either of those thresholds. Maybe things ended up working out. Maybe Umti's great. Maybe Impact has one of those amazing splits that he has. He tends to play a lot better the first split he's back on a new organization, so it'll be fun to see that. Maybe APA and Yon take those leaps, but those are all, ifs, and I'm just not willing to commit to those right now. If I had to guess, I would expect this team to fall exactly where I have them here. A little bit worse than the best teams, but a little bit better than the worst. And now we get to move into the top 3. The top 3 for me are all, really, really good teams. I've been talking about it, but there is a bit of a gap in between a lot of these tiers in the LCS. I think, bottom 3 feel kind of locked. Even really bottom 2 and then 6th place for me are kind of locked. And then 5th place is kind of locked. And then 4th place is kind of locked, all for me. But starting in the top 3, I think all of these teams are pretty elite. And they're definitely better than the ones that have come before them. The order is just, the floor, in my opinion. So coming in at number 3 and at the start of the B tier, which, explaining it here are teams that, realistically want to make finals. These are teams that very much want to be teams that, make MSI being the 2nd seed from North America, but I don't think, a lot of people are really going to be trying to get number 1, or at least expecting to get number 1 going into the season with just the super team that's up there. But, coming in at the bottom of B tier and at number 3 in my power rankings, it is going to be FlyQuest. I feel like this is really the only place I can put them. I feel very confident in the other 2 teams that are above them in the power rankings, but they are clearly significantly better than every team that we have talked about up until this point, even with some of the question marks. The young bot lane, the fact that Jensen's coming off of, probably the worst split he's had in a while, the fact that Inspired is coming off having not played last split, the fact that Whippo is coming off having not played all of last year, and so there are question marks about this team. They're certainly not the most established, guaranteed successful team that I've ever seen, but man, the upside is absolutely there. If everything clicks for them, they're going to be a really dangerous team to end up facing, and one of the few that I think could actually genuinely compete for a top 1 spot. So let's talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Whippo in the top lane, Inspired in the jungle, Jensen in the mid lane, Masu at AD carry, and Busio at support. This is a pretty stacked starting 5, and really there isn't a lot of, places to point to and say this is a definite weakness. Now, there are some players on this team that I'm maybe not as high on as some other analysts are. I certainly don't think this is a super team in the same way that FlyQuest assembled a super team last offseason. When you looked at it on paper and you were like, this is definitely going to be a top 2 team, and if anything else happens, it's a major disappointment. Spoiler alert, it was a major disappointment that they got 9th in the summer split, but I think they did a pretty good job of going out and assembling a team that I think realistically could work together and does have, a couple of synergies that I like together as players. Of course, all 5 members from last year are gone. This is a brand new 5, 1 promotion from in-house in the AD carry spot, which is obviously great, but everybody else is new, so we'll start from top to support here, starting with Bwipo in the top lane. People might be frustrated by some of these player rankings. I understand, like I said at the beginning of the video, that not all of these are going to be consensus and not all of them are going to be popular opinions. Having Bwipo as low as the number 5 top laner in the LCS, I don't imagine is going to be a particularly popular opinion, especially for European fans who might not be as familiar with the LCS. But who do you put him above in terms of the players that ended up above him? He comes in right below Impact and right below Rich, and I think both of those players project to be bigger impacts towards their team in 2024. At least that's what I would expect. I think both of them fit the LCS style a little better. Bwipo obviously is a very selfless player. He's somebody that's willing to give up resources to help the rest of his team, but even in that same, kind of vein, when he was in North America on Team Liquid the first time around in 2022, he was a pretty resource-heavy player for that TL team. They really needed somebody to be able to dump resources into, and oftentimes it did end up being Bwipo. Obviously, I'm not afraid that he's going to be able to transition into a, lower resource style, but he probably is going to have to do that on this team because there are 2 other players that I think you want to play for as much as possible. This isn't some sort of slight onto Bwipo, though. He comes in just above a player like Fake God that I also see as like a very, very good player. I think Bwipo, top 5 of top lane, like I said earlier, feels very locked, and it's the deepest position in the LCS right now for me. Maybe outside of support or maybe jungle, but top lane really feels like the deepest position, and I think Bwipo at 5 really is an example of that. And then you have Inspired. He comes in as my 2nd ranked jungler. I know that might be a little high for some people, but all he has done ever since he, really broke out on Rogue in the LEC is be one of the best junglers in the West, no matter what the situation has been. He was awesome on Rogue, was an MVP there, came over to Evil Geniuses, was awesome on that team every split. Basically, no matter who else was playing in that lineup, he made that team better. He can carry, he can facilitate. I think it would be disrespectful to put him anything other than number 2 here. I was shocked when he didn't have a team in the summer split because I know Evil Geniuses wanted to go in a different direction, but nobody being able to pick him up was certainly surprising. I think he's going to come in and basically immediately reclaim one of those spots as one of the best junglers in the league. I think, I really would be surprised if he doesn't come out and just really dominate again like he was before he took that break. And then you've got Jensen in the mid lane. If you are looking for an area to be at least a little concerned about, mid lane is potentially that area. Yes, Jensen does come in as my number 3 mid laner, which I think some people might see as like way too high, and even I myself look at that number and go, that's probably inaccurate, but I liked Jensen's 2023 more than your average analyst did. I thought he did a lot more for Dignitas. He kind of changed up his style, became a bit more resource heavy as the year ended up going on, and he was really good in the playoffs for that team. They ended up finishing in 6th place, which I think a lot of people forget, but that was basically off the back of Jensen having a really good playoffs. I think this player still has a lot to give, and I think this team fits his needs a lot better than that Dignitas team did. One of the biggest problems that team had, and one of the reasons why Jensen had to go to such an aggressive style, was they didn't have a carry. They didn't have somebody who loved having resources. Jensen has always been at his best, especially in the back half of his career in the recent years, being a facilitator, being someone who can play Orianna and Zillion and Anivia and a lot of these more passive control mages in the mid lane. That's kind of been his style, having a jungler that wants to be aggro and to play for them. That's what Jensen does at a very high level. Think of a player like Niski over in the LEC. I think they're very similar in terms of playstyle. Obviously, they get there in very different ways, but mentality-wise, I think that's an apt comparison. So to have a jungler like Inspired on this team for Jensen to be able to play for, I think that's going to go a lot better than having a much more passive, facilitating type of jungler like Santorin was for Dig last year. And then you've got Masu and Busio down in the bot lane, 2 very young, NA prodigies, if you will, two very hyped prospects coming up here to the LCS. Busio played last year with 100 Thieves, obviously got to play an entire year with Doublelift as his AD carry in Doublelift's, reported final year of his career, which is certainly a pretty big achievement. But, there is good and bad from what Busio showed on tape in 2023. There was definitely good. There were some games where he really was just able to take over, and specifically when he was on Rakan, he looked like a completely different player. The playmaking ability, the confidence that he had, it just looked a lot better. But the problem was when teams started figuring that out and they started banning Rakan, that team really started struggling. Busio was not very good on any other champion. People point out players like APA for being, very one-dimensional and having small champion pools. I don't know why no one is bringing that same argument up when it comes to a player like Busio. I get it's not as noticeable in the support position, but I think the performances were drastically different. And I'm not saying he can't be a really good player, a top 1, top 2 support in the region if he continues to grow. But, what I saw from him in 2023 was not the player that I think everybody wanted him to be in 2024. And so you're looking for growth. You're looking for more this year, which is why he comes in at number 5 and not number 4 over a player like Ayla. I think Ayla did show more versatility, as I said in the 100 Thieves ranking, but Busio was still a really good player. I gave them identical grades in the first place, and so, I think it's pretty much even there, but, I need to see more about Busio. I need to see him step up and really be a playmaker on a lot of different circumstances in a bunch of different team environments before I feel confident saying that he is one of the best supports in North America. And then a player that I really don't need to see a ton of at the top level to really believe in is Masu. We've talked about this over the course of this video, but AD carry in North America is pretty up for grabs. There is not a lot of established, guaranteed, strong, AD carry talent in NA at the current moment. Yon came in at number 4. I think Masu is the guy. If anybody who watched NACL last year kind of realized that Masu was the guy. He was the best player in Tier 2 by a gigantic margin. He was playing on ping from Canada on a server in California against people who were on 0 ping for basically the entire year, and he was still mega stomping them because mechanically speaking, he is just one of the best AD carries that I have seen. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he's a Jojo Pune level prospect because that's just a hard bar to reach. We've never had a prospect in North America as touted and as dominant as JoJo was, but in my time of covering, Tier 2 in North America, which it's been, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years at this point, I can't remember a prospect that I thought was as sure thing as what Masu is. I think he's going to come into this team and basically immediately be a game changer and one of the best AD carries in the league. If he's number 1 on this list, maybe outside of Berserker, if he's number 2 on this list in terms of AD carries by the end of, the spring split, I'm not going to be surprised. This is somebody who's never played a game at the LCS level, and yet I am so confident, I am so sure that he's going to be able to come in and dominate. I really don't think there's going to be a lot of growing pains. Now, are there concerns? Yes. Masu and Busio are very young, and maybe Masu is just not who I think he is, at least on day 1. That is possible. I think he probably will be, but, it's not guaranteed. And Busio's certainly not a player that I'm, hitching my wagon to and guaranteeing is going to have a big breakout year. I think that they both have a lot to prove. Jensen has a lot to prove being back on a contending team after really not proving it last year. Neither of your topside players played last year, or played last split at least. So a lot of things could go wrong for this team. There's a lot of projection, but there is so much to like here and so much upside. I think you could argue that this team has the highest upside of anyone not called Cloud9 in the LCS right now, and I wouldn't disagree with that at all. If everything clicks for this team, this absolutely should be a top 2 team. They should be going to Worlds. They should be going to MSI, but it's just hard to predict that at the beginning of the year when you've got another team kind of sitting there that already feels pretty, complete in terms of what they offer. So as much as I like FlyQuest, they're going to have to deal with coming in 3rd for now. And that's going to bring us to our final 2 teams to cover in the video. It's not really a surprise in what order these 2 come in. I think everything else up until this point was a little more up for debate. But coming in at number 2 and at the top of the B tier for me, it is going to be NRG, the reigning champions of the LCS, the number 1 seed coming out of the season finals and at Worlds and being able to make quarterfinals, beating G2 at Worlds. It was a pretty miraculous run, and they've returned 4 of the 5 members of that team going into 2024. Only one change was made, and in my opinion, it's a pretty noticeable upgrade in the support position, as I talked about in my offseason grades video. And so Energy and looking even stronger than they did when they won LCS and got to quarterfinals last year, which is a pretty good sign. But let's talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Dokla in the top lane, Contracts in the jungle, Palafox in the mid lane, FBI at AD carry, and Huhi at support. This is a pretty scary lineup. I think there's a lot more synergy here than people end up remembering. Obviously, the 4 members who played on this energy team last year that grew and developed together over time. And then obviously Huhi coming in, but Huhi and FBI have ridiculous amounts of synergy and chemistry together from their time on 100 Thieves when they played together for like 3 years in a row, and Golden Guardians as well before they even were picked up by 100 Thieves. And so those two obviously know each other. Those two obviously wanted to play together again in this offseason, and the rest of the team was certainly it's not broke, don't fix it experiment. So we can go through these individual players, but it's pretty clear to me that this team is coming in at number 2, and you can definitely see that in terms of the player grades. But starting in the top lane with Big Dokes, Dokla coming in here, he has cemented himself as one of the best top laners in North America. There are times where he's going to be number 1, but he is still a bit inconsistent. He's a very good carry, and obviously he's very good at multiple parts of the game, a good laner, a good team fighter, but not every single game ends up going his way. That's the only thing that ends up keeping him out of that number 1 spot, is that the mechanical dominance that he shows is just not as consistent as it is for the number 1 player domestically, in my opinion. But Dokla's amazing. There are going to be large stretches of time during the season where he is the number 1 top laner in North America, or at least that's kind of what he has been over the past few years. He's just an amazing player, and this team is super lucky to be able to have him on the roster. He's a diamond in the rough. I can't believe that they were able to just pluck him back out of tier 2 after basically every team gave up on him after his bad first stint on Optic in the LCS. For him to get another shot here on Energy, and, you know, for him to be as good as he has been, it's a major win for this team. And then Contracts and Palafox, these two have been playing together the longest of anybody here on Energy. They were both a part of that 2022 kind of revamp of the roster that I talked about a bit earlier in the video when comparing it to 100 Thieves. Contracts was really, I don't want to say a veteran by that point, but he had been to Worlds, he had gone over to Golden Guardians and led the league in deaths multiple times, and then, you know, had gone up and down with 100 Thieves and Evil Geniuses, and, you know, had really struggled to maintain a tier 1 spot. Finally gets another shot here on Energy, or on CLG at the time, and he blew it out the water. I mean, the inconsistencies that we saw from Contracts at the beginning of his career haven't entirely evaporated, but Summer Split was probably the best split that he has ever had as a pro, and that's really, really encouraging. The consistency actually kind of was there. The bad games had gotten significantly less bad, and it felt like he had a very good chemistry with Palafox in the mid lane. Palafox kind of took some of that inconsistency, some of that feast or famine play style from Contracts in the Summer Split, but generally Contracts is such a positive for this team, and Palafox has very much cemented himself as one of the best mid laners in North America. I've been on this train. I've been talking about it for quite a long time on this channel. He's been an all-pro basically every single split the last like 3 or 4 splits. Like the last year and a half has been, you know, me praising Palafox. I gave him 3rd team All-Pro in 2022 summer. I gave him, I believe, 3rd team All-Pro in 2023 spring. It was either 3rd or 2nd team. I can't quite remember. And then, you know, controversially, I didn't give him All-Pro in summer because I thought it was his most inconsistent split of the last 3, and I still believe that. He, I think, took a bit of the responsibility on to be kind of the hyper carry for the team in the early game, like the heavy resource player, if you will, the strong side, and I just think it caused a bit more confusion. I'm not exactly sure that's a role that he needs to fill. Dokla and FBI are both more than qualified enough to be able to fill that role, but, you know, Palafox is an awesome player, and especially with how inconsistent North American mids are, and just the mid lane talent pool in North America is, it was a pretty easy choice to have him come in the top 2. And then you've got the bot lane here, which might even be just the most consistent part of the team. You're bringing FBI and Huhi back together here on Energy. FBI was really, really good last split. He's been really good for a long time. I feel like I get pushback every single year in these primer videos when I rank FBI highly. I know I did last year. I know I did in 2022. I'm interested to see if that's going to happen again this year in 2024, because I don't know what else this guy has to prove. I get it that he's not perfect internationally every single time. He struggled at Worlds in 2023, and he struggled at World, or not 2023, in 2022. And, you know, I think a lot of people looked at that Evil Geniuses run and said he could have done more, but he certainly wasn't the problem there. It just feels like everywhere he goes, he wins, and he wins lane, and he wins team fights, and he's just a very versatile, very strong player. There are not 80 carries in North America that are as consistent as FBI. There just aren't. He's an amazing domestic performer. He was finals MVP in the summer split. He's awesome, and they're really happy to be able to bring him back. This was a phenomenal midseason addition that I think I called, and, you know, I know a lot of other people were lower on him, but I've always been high on FBI, and I'm glad to see that it continuously pays off. And then You've got Huhi in the support position. To me, he's the #1 support in North America. I think that obviously that has to be defended, but he was very clearly the best support in 2023. It was not close last year. Golden Guardians was a super fun team, and they had a lot going for them. Licorice completely rebroke out. You know, River and Gory had pretty good chemistry together, and River especially was awesome. Stixay had a career resurgence year, an MVP caliber year, but to me, the best player on Golden Guardians last year was Huhi. He was the one driving them forward. He was second in my MVP voting in summer, only behind Jojo Pune, who obviously ended up winning the award, but Huki was amazing for that Golden Guardians team that was #1 in the regular season. He deserved all the praise that he was getting, and until proven otherwise, he's the best support in North America. He's been such a long-standing positive member of every team that he's played for, and it's kind of cool. He's kind of pseudo coming home here. Obviously started his career with CLG in the mid lane, became a champion, you know, very early on into his career. Things kind of derailed. He had to move around to a couple different teams, but to get back here into, you know, kind of the CLG successor in energy, and to pair up with FBI, to be on, you know, a team with very fun players like Dokla, Contracts, and Palafox is great. Is there volatility and potential negatives, potential regression from this team? I think it's possible. I think obviously players like Contracts and Dokla and, you know, Palafox even aren't exactly the most consistent players in the entire world, but all they have to do is play together. If they play as a unit, they were really, really good at doing that last year, and this is a great coaching staff. We obviously know that they have a giant, you know, factor in what energy ends up doing. I love the structure that they have surrounding them. This is going to be a really good team, and at least until a team like FlyQuest proves that all of the question marks about them aren't true, energy is going to be coming in at the power rankings just below #1. And that's going to bring us to our #1 team. And really, is this a surprise? Is anyone shocked? Is anyone even surprised a little bit as to who's coming in at #1? We're going to be making a tier jump here. We just finished B tier, but we're not going to A tier. We're going to S tier. That's genuinely how I see the LCS in 2024. It's a travesty if this team doesn't win everything. It's, of course, Cloud9. And I know this seems like hyperbole. I know this seems like it's an unfair thing to put on a team that has never played as a group of 5 together, but if this is not the best team in North American League of Legends history, I think they're going to look at this as a disappointment if they don't walk out of this year with 2 LCS titles, with a decent performance at MSI and a decent performance at Worlds. I think they're going to look at this as a disappointment because, and I'm going to blow it all here. I'm going to put the big money line here. This is the best team on paper in the history of North American League of Legends. There has never been, in my opinion, a stronger roster. You can talk about all of these other teams that have been put together. You can talk about 2018 Team Liquid. You can talk about 2016 or 2015 or 2014 TSM. You can talk about 2022 FlyQuest on paper, right? You can put any of these teams up, and I don't think any of them touch what Cloud9 has been able to put together at the beginning of this year. So let's talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Fudge in the top lane, Blabber in the jungle, Jojo Pune in the mid lane, Berserker at AD carry, and Vulcan at support. I think all of this comes down to the crux of you can make an argument not only that every single player is the best in their role in the LCS, which I'm making the argument that 4 of the 5 are the best players in their role, and the support is the second best, and that's only because he's coming off of the worst split of his professional career. But even outside of that, this team, without controversy, without a doubt, has the 3 single best players in North America right now on this team. Blabber, Jojo, and Berserker. They are the 3 best players in the LCS. They are together on this roster. Fudge has dominated everyone domestically, regardless of what people want to say about his international performances. And Vulcan, the last time he was on Cloud9, was clearly the best support in North America. This is ridiculous what they've been able to put together. Obviously, 3 members returning, technically, from last year. 1 kind of getting reunited with this team after a year off, and then obviously a new recruit in the mid lane, a new Cloud9 mid laner to add to the legacy. But we'll go in order here. We'll start with Fudge in the top lane. Again, people might be a little cross about him coming in as the #1 top laner, but when you watch this guy domestically, it's just not really all that up for debate. If Licorice was in the league, I think there would be more of an argument, because Licorice was really the only top laner that was consistently able to beat Fudge in 2023. Nobody else was consistently able to do it. There were times where it was in favor of some other players like Impact and like Rich, there were times where it looked okay, but the consistency just wasn't there. Fudge is so good domestically. I understand international performances are important, but when you look at projecting out into the LCS into the future, there's no top lane that I trust more than Fudge right now to be able to win. He was the runner-up for MVP in the spring split for me, and even though he dipped a bit in the summer, certainly had less of a role on this team, he's still a dominant player and one that deserves a lot of recognition. And then you've got Blabber. I'm almost tired of talking about Blabber in these videos because I feel like I say the same thing every single year. Every single time I do one of these primers, I have the same argument, I get the same comments, and every single year I end up being right. Blabber is the best endemic North American player in the history of the LCS. There is nobody that was born in the United States or Canada that has been better in the history of the LCS than Blabber. You can make an argument that a player like Bjergsen could potentially go up against him, but I think he has surpassed Doublelift, and honestly, I think he has surpassed Bjergsen. I think Blabber is the greatest LCS player of all time, and I think he will continue that legacy on. He is a player that does perform internationally. Even when this team doesn't necessarily do as well as you would want, his performances are pretty much always up to snuff. Yeah, he'll make mistakes here or there. He'll have crab moments, or he'll be a little bit too aggressive in the early game, or sometimes he'll take a fight in the mid game that his team doesn't necessarily win, but he is so much better than everyone else that he's playing against at this level that it's almost an unfair comparison to watch him play. He is number one, and it's not close. Then you have Jojo Pune, the new blood in the mid lane. He was the single best player in the LCS in the regular season last year. He was the unanimous MVP, and he absolutely deserved it. So what does he do? He goes to this team, the most talented team in the league, to pair with these other two players. It's ridiculous for Jojo, who seemingly is only getting better and only getting more consistent. For him to go here, it's unfair. Blabber is the best endemic and best LCS player of all time in my eyes. Jojo's coming for that crown, and he's on pace to be able to break that record. We've never seen a talent that has been able to come through the system as quickly as he has and dominate in the way that he has. He is a prodigy in every sense of the word, and he has lived up to every semblance of hype that he got before he entered the LCS. He is an amazing player, easy choice for number one mid laner. Berserker, oh my, this is the single best player in the LCS at the current moment. What gold LS was able to strike when he brought Berserker over to North America. Obviously, he saw what this player could be, and for him to stick around, for him to stay in North America, not only this offseason, but reportedly for next year as well. It's ridiculous, what he is willing to do, because he really is too good for NA. He dominates everybody in a way that we just haven't seen players at this level do for a very long time. He is so good that I truly do believe that if you dragged and dropped him into the LCK, he could be a top 3, top 2 AD carry in the LCK right now. That's the kind of talent that he has. Now, sometimes it's not always going to look like that, because he can get a little ego in the LCS, but wouldn't you if you had the talent that Berserker has and you're going up against tactical, no offense, but it's just unfair, the difference between him and every other player at his position right now. Easy choice for number one. And then you're bringing back Vulcan. Again, maybe he's coming off the worst split of his career on FlyQuest where everything went wrong. He individually didn't play well, but look back to spring of last year. He was awesome on Evil Geniuses with Jojo Pune, mind you. Those two had very good chemistry. Jojo sometimes went a little bit too far in the spring split, but Vulcan was there to kind of corral him in. And all of those years before, he was on cloud 9, and he was the best support in North America. This organization just seems to pump out support players like their life depends on it. Whether it's Lemon Nation, or whether it's Smoothie, or whether it's Zazel, or Vulcan, or even Sven, whoever it is, whoever is playing for this team ends up being better because of it. I have a lot of confidence that Vulcan's going to bounce back, and he might just be the best support in North America from day one on this roster, getting to play with Berserker, getting to play with Blabber, getting to play with Jojo. This is the recipe for success. I really don't mean this as hyperbole. If this team does not clean sweep the LCS, it is a major disappointment. I hate to put so much expectation on a roster, but truly, I don't think we've ever seen a team as dominant as they are on paper. And generally speaking, the league's second and third and fourth best teams all have more question marks than you would usually have out of those teams. This is Cloud9's league to lose. And if they don't walk out of 2023, or 2024, I should say, as unanimous champions with success internationally, I really do think they're going to look back and wonder where it went wrong. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCS 2024 Spring Split Primer and Power Rankings video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. We went from 8 to 1. I don't think I threw a ton of curveballs in there, but I really don't think the LCS is really kind of primed for curveballs this year. At least on paper, it doesn't really feel like there are a lot of, conflicting opinions. Cloud9's the best team in the league. Your bottom three feel like the bottom three. Energy and FlyQuest are going to fight for that 2 spot, and Liquid and Shopify are kind of somewhere in the middle. That kind of just seems to be everybody's power rankings, and I'm certainly not trying to copy anybody, but especially looking around, it just seems to be pretty common knowledge that that's kind of what everybody is expecting going into the year. It's definitely going to be interesting to see if any team can really change those, perceptions and those perspectives. Somebody's going to overachieve and somebody is going to underachieve. It's just going to be interesting to see who. But if you guys did enjoy, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people. If you're new here, hit subscribe. We just covered the LEC week number 1 on this channel. We've done primers for the LEC and the LCK. You can check those out. If you subscribe to the channel, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Not only do we have an LCS video coming out today, we're going to have the NACL primer coming out tomorrow. That's going to preview everything you can expect from Tier 2 in North America. So North American fans, you're definitely going to want to check that out as well. And then, in a couple of days here, we're going to have the LPL primer out as well to go over that. That'll be all 5 major regions covered in primers, and then we will get to weekly reviews for all of them in due time as well. So if you're interested in that stuff, hit subscribe, hit that bell, so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.